So tonight I want to review the film Full Metal Jacket, and and to me this is one of the best war films ever made, and it's also a very interesting film because it's definitely multi-thematic. And Full Metal Jacket is a film by Stanley Kubrick, which is considered who is considered one of the famous and probably the greatest director of all time. And this film is about like a bunch of soldiers who go through basic training. They deal with an abusive drill instructor, and then they end up in Vietnam and they survive in there. And I think first of all, I want to talk about the things that I did not like about the film. I think that one of the big controversies of Stanley Kubrick is his storytelling. Like sometimes he has really great actors and really great performances, but prior to Pulp Fiction in 1994, films that just were either non-linear or they felt like a part one and a part two, those films were not really successful, or those were not really films that won Oscars because people were just not used to non-linear storytelling. The big issue in Full Metal Jacket is that there's really no sense of a main character, because even though like Modine, if I'm saying his name correctly, Private Joker, even though he's the main character of the movie, you focus on so many other people. And R. Lee Ermey, the drill instructor in the beginning of the film, like he gets killed off. You're kind of almost like there's no sense of. Yeah, it just feels like you're watching. It just feels like you're almost reading two novellas, or you're watching two long short films, because, like, the beginning of the film doesn't have consequences onto the end of the film, and that was done by purpose. So I think like that kind of for me, that kind of really hurt the film. And I also think what also hurt the film is, like I said, is that it's not just like it feeling like a part one and a part two. And A Clockwork Orange got the same criticism for that, where it felt like it was a part one and a part two. The other things, like I said, like there was a great ensemble, but even though Matt Modine was the main actor in this film, he really didn't do enough, I kind of felt, to kind of tie the movie all together. Like sometimes when you have like an actor that's in the film, and they're trying to it's their job to kind of hold the whole film together. So there's not like one storyline that he's kind of really a part of, because really in basic training he was just taking care of his friend Gomer Pyle and mentoring him, and then later on he just is all about surviving the Vietnam War. But I really think that with his character, ultimately he is somebody who understands that war is a shitty situation, but it's better to be alive than dead, and it is what it is. But it's also written as a book. But it's also based on a book, so maybe like the whole theme is that one of the good reasons to survive war, or just to live through it, is that you can be a storyteller, and you can talk about like how horrible it is. I also felt that, just like when you watch the movie Barry Lyndon, another issue with the film is that you see like a lot of the same type of cinematography shots. Like you see like a lot of long zooms. You see like a lot of different like tracking shots. And also I think like with Kubrick, like one of his weaknesses is that he emphasizes cinematography so much that sometimes the script kind of suffers a little bit. And also like with his dialogue, even though like there's a lot of subtext and there's a lot of themes, there's a lot of dissection, it doesn't feel like stuff a person would say. And I think with his line delivery, like all the characters, some of the characters are comedic, but it's all kind of very philosophical and deep. So it's almost like reading a T.S. Eliot poem, where there's like deep allegory and double meaning and a lot of deep meaning in it, but it's not really realistic dialogue like you would see more so in a Quentin Tarantino type of film. It does kind of feel like its own style, but it does kind of feel very like superficial when that's not that's not so realistic. But that's kind of how I felt, because I think that in some of the things, I mean, like they're all ball busting, and there's like this character that's Animal Mug that's racist against his black friend, that 8 Ball, and it seems like, like, wow, it didn't seem realistic that this person would be calling that person racial slurs, and they would still like kind of be like best friends and whatever. It wouldn't really work that way in real life. And I also don't think that, again, when people use superficial language, that's kind of like, realistic for a war zone. Again, it may just be like satirical. It's probably just like Kubrick being satirical, and he's very, very successful in it, but it doesn't feel like realistic dialogue. There are a lot of things that are great about the film. Like, obviously, the ensemble is really good. Definitely really great directing, because it is definitely a satire, and that's kind of how I would say this film. It's not a drama. It's a war satire. The same way Clockwork Orange is a satire. The same way like South Park is a satire. And a satire is basically a comedy that has elements of that has comedy that makes you think, and it's also like comedy that there's deep meaning and allegory to it. Like, the Canterbury Tales is probably the earliest famous example of that. South Park is an excellent example of that. Like, the past like maybe 5 or 10 years, like a lot of it has been satires of society. And there's other like literary works like that as well. But so it's definitely a very strong satirical piece. I also think it's a very strong piece about like what it's like to be in the military, because like obviously there's a lot of stories that came out about like abuse in the military or drill instructors doing certain things, like, instead of choking you because they can't do that, they'll have you lean forward into their hand. A lot of things did change in the military, because obviously you can't abuse people, and then also you can't treat people differently because of their race, because of their sexuality, and because of them being atheist. So, obviously this film did kind of highlight, just what it was like decades ago, when it was, you had to be, if you were a white Christian, you got treated with a lot of respect, but if you were anybody different, that was not respected. And then also, I really think that, another theme of this is like how war really destroys people psychologically. Like, there's definitely Gomer Pyle's character, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, if I'm saying it very well. Like, obviously, it was a robbery that R. Lee Ermey and Vincent D'Onofrio were not nominated for Oscars or won Oscars. Like, R. Lee Ermey really deserved it that year, but Oscar politics. But I do think that, obviously, Gomer Pyle's descent into madness, that was a very good theme. And it's actually interesting, like, how it's more so inspired by bullying and hazing. And I think that was kind of really important, because, sometimes people don't realize that like I said, the old school attitude of suck it up, of tolerate bullying and suck it up, that's not the best approach. What kills you doesn't make you stronger. Be hard on people, and the strongest people will tolerate the hardest abuse. That's not the best mentality. Like in the movie Whiplash, like how Terrence Fletcher, the abusive teacher, once said that the best musician would not give up no matter what. So that's kind of how I kind of feel that, and how I kind of feel about his mental breakdown, which is, it kind of is a resemblant of that type of thinking, not only in the military, but in like but in like everyday life in society, where people believe in abusing people to build them up stronger, when all that does is harbor a lot of anger and pain. And I also think that, like, when you see like the helicopter ride, see some guy like using a machine gun and mowing down people, and he's like laughing and screaming, and he's like laughing and having a good time, and saying like ain't war hell, whatever. That's another example of PTSD and trauma, because he's ultimately just desensitized to the violence that he's causing, so he's inflicting more violence and whatever. Like, he's becoming more of like a sadist. And definitely, like, there's characters like Joker who can hold himself together through war zones, but in the end of the day, he kind of knows that he's kind of like, in a world of shit or fucked over. So he has like a nihilistic point of view. I can imagine him having some PTSD, or having some severe depression, or just like a cynical look at the world because of what he's been through. So, other things that I liked is that I really love the editing. That I think they did a great job with the editing. They usually do a lot of crossfades in the beginning of the film. Towards the end of the film, you didn't really see a lot of crossfades, and I'm like a sucker for crossfades. And also, I love the cinematography. Like, some of my favorite scenes is like when they're like climbing obstacle courses. You see like the sun, like the sunset was all orange, and you see like their silhouettes. Definitely, I think that Kubrick was taking a lot from Barry Lyndon, because he won his film won best cinematography for Barry Lyndon. So there's a lot of shots that look like it was filmed during sunset or the magic hour, and then also the indoor scenes were very reminiscent of The Shining, with a lot of the symmetry, and then also when you look at Gomer Pyle's face, it's very similar to Jack Nicholson's face when he looked kind of angry and deranged. And also A Clockwork Orange, because he used a lot of blue lighting and whatever. So he did kind of like play with so some of it did feel like a homage to his older work, which is not a problem. And then when you look at the satirical element, it's very much a homage to Doctor Strangelove. And this was his penultimate film, because then after that he did Eyes Wide Shut, and then he passed away. But I do think that, this is one of the best war films. Obviously, when you watch the film, there is a lot of things that remind you of Apocalypse Now. Like, definitely the set designs, the uses of smoke. There's definitely, like, tracking shots. There's definitely uses of fire and smoke and different colors. But I think Apocalypse Now just took it to another level, because Vittorio Storaro, who did Apocalypse Now, the cinematography for it, he used gels. He really just made it very like artsy and colorful to kind of articulate the main character's insanity. Like, it was a colorful film, and because the main character looked at the world through the eyes of somebody who is psychologically damaged by war. But in Full Metal Jacket, I think it's more so Kubrick using what works for Kubrick. Like a lot of just the symmetry shots, the pull, like a lot of the zoom outs and other things like that. So yeah, and I think that's how I felt about it. And I also kind of think that, with Kubrick, he was a huge innovator, but in this film, he really wasn't innovating anything. I kind of felt that he was more so just making his Vietnam War film. And it's not like Barry Lyndon, where he's experimenting with cinematography, or 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he's experimenting with special effects. Because I think that if he always had that approach with every film, just taking that one element and then just redoing a whole genre through that element, like special effects in 2001: A Space Odyssey, or cinematography in Barry Lyndon, I think that every film he would have done would have kind of stood out a lot more. But there's a lot to be said about this film. There's definitely a lot of different themes, but I think those are two of the big ones. Just like psychological breakdowns people have through their experience in the military, whether it be seeing violence, or whether it be abusive drill instructors, or just hazing and other things like that. And also, again, like, that was a very old mentality of just bullying and hazing. And nowadays we kind of have a lot more education that doesn't actually motivate people to do better. That's just harboring a lot of feelings, and it doesn't end that well. So, I think that this is a very well-made film. Obviously, I think anybody who watches it, my video is going to be around 15 minutes, but there's a lot of just different talking points to this film. And I'm happy to have reviewed it, because it's definitely one of the most important films in cinema.